Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Juta Padakamalang Shri Gurun.
Hare Krishna, Akandadhi. It's been a long time since I've seen you, and history is moving along, and we're all, moving with it. So, just for the record, I work with you very closely at different times, and I think for majority of devotees don't really know the level of complexity and difficulties that you personally and the temple had to go through, and the structure of defending the temple from being seized, because at the end of the day, I understand that could have happened.
Certainly, the issue was for the temple. We were under huge attack, and we shouldn't just think, oh, they were trying to stop a few people coming to the temple. The intention by the local council and in cahoots with the local residents was to stop the manor in existence entirely. To actually close the manor, if not allow it to be seized by the council and sold.
Whoa!
So that no Hare Krishnas were in the village, and property values could go back to their nice steady incline upwards.
That's a very serious thing.
It was very serious. We were fighting for the existence of Srila Prabhupada's special home.
Yes.
The home that he loved when he first came there in '73 and said, this is, the nicest place.
Yes. So, we, in general, devotees around the world, don't really know how long the whole process of litigation and demonstration and public inquiry, which is quite a serious financial undertaking, and the acquisition of the property, as you really put a lot of pressure on to obtain.
Well, here's a potted history. In 1973 we purchased, moved in, and created a kerfuffle. No doubt. We announced ourselves in a startling way to the local residents. Some were pleased to see us and thought we were cute. Others less so. And then when people were starting to come, even in those mid-70s years, I joined the temple in '75, and I remember one of the first things discussing with Mukunda Maharaj, a newspaper article he had secured, which basically said, no, it was the visitors to the pub who were actually the real trouble for the village,
yes,
not the devotees. So that was some nice public promotion that he'd achieved for us.
Okay.
But the point was that the issue had begun during that time. There was an enforcement notice issued against us in the 70s, late 70s, and that was appealed. Vichitavirya was in charge of handling that. At a very late stage in that, he asked me to help him, with the drafting the evidence and the statements and things like that. We were due to go to public inquiry in '81, and just before the inquiry began, we did a deal with the council. The enforcement notice was to stop all the festivals, and they agreed then we could have 6 festival days, providing that, in their understanding, that there would never be any more than 1,000 people on any other day.
Not very fair.
Which was, they thought, that's ample for what you're meant to be, a little theological college.
That's what they thought.
They thought that was, so we agreed to that, and in '82 then the document was drawn up, and at that time it was the Section 52 agreement. Things trundled on, but after the sale of Chaitanya College, there was huge input to the manor. we were beyond any kind of planning or logistics use of the place. So a lot had to be settled down after that in '85. Then in 1986, the council had been counting the number of visitors coming to the manor on Sundays.
Okay.
And they actually did a racial count. At that time, the devotees had purchased 3 properties in the village and the village shop, which was called Krishna's. Now, this was a mistake, and it was compounded by the GBC at the time at the Janmashtami festival in '85, '86, announcing to everyone on the stage, we're going to buy up the village.
Oh.
So that message probably got through to the village, and they thought, we have to end this. So they tried to get evidence that more than 1,000 people were coming on Sundays. The reason they did the racial count was to say we can separate those who may be devotees, residents of the place, from those who are just visitors. That was their way. That was their rationale. They then issued they tried to go for a High Court injunction, and that was to enforce the conditions of the Section 52 agreement. And see, it's one thing to be in breach of an agreement, but if you're in breach of a High Court injunction, you're in serious trouble. And that they could sequestrate the property. Basically, if you just keep on committing the offence, they could just take the property off you.
So at what stage did this...
So we could have lost the manor through that process.
Such early days.
That was probably one of the most dangerous points.
Whoa.
We appealed to the High Court, and it was magical what happened there, because the judge realised that the wording of the document was so flawed. He said, this is the worst drafted document I've ever seen. Yes. Well, there was the agreement that we both signed. It is meaningless. It can't be enforced. Therefore, I have to rule in favour of the temple. So they didn't get their High Court injunction. However, the judge noted that this is not necessarily good news for the temple, because he's called it a Pyrrhic victory. You may have won this, but actually by the Heartsmen not getting their injunction, they are likely to take even more draconian measures against you. And sure enough, a little later, by the end of the year in '87, it trundled on to the beginning of '87, then we got the new enforcement notice, and that was to stop all visitors coming. It was just to take it back to 50 residents only using the manor and no one else, period.
Oh my days.
This wasn't just a question of stopping our Hindu visitors coming for weekends or something like that. This would have absolutely curtailed all preaching, stifled the life out of the manor.
Oh my God.
Probably choked it to death financially, and obliged us to move somewhere else.
Oh, no.
We would have had to move. There would have been no point.
The seriousness of the devotees being insensitive to the English mentality in the village and declaring publicly on the platform that they're going to buy up the village, and the shop having a insensitive attitude towards the shop in the village, that agitated people.
It was a mistake because we were doing it at a period of weakness.
Okay.
We own, devotees own properties in the village now, but it's not an issue because we've sorted out a lot of the other issues, and the relationship is good, and the manor's status is strong, and it's not a problem. But at that time, we'd already been through so much. We were under such strain with the council that to do that was just foolish.
Was it the wrong time?
It was the wrong time.
Okay.
So anyway, that was the main enforcement notice issued that could have ended in the closure of the manor. So we appealed.
Are we saying that at that particular time they could have actually seized the property.
They
They
did.
could, or very close
No.
to it.
No, they had lost, at the High Court, they had lost the opportunity for the court to sequestrate the property, because if the High Court injunction wasn't upheld, then we couldn't be in contravention of a High Court injunction.
Right.
So we were saved from that situation.
Right.
And if that had gone through, we probably wouldn't have survived.
Oh, it would have been hell.
I can't see how we would have got around that easily. Whereas now we were dealing with an enforcement notice, so it was a planning issue, and it went to appeal. At that time we had the idea of the road, and the idea of the road I had discussed with Victor de Vera way back in 1981.
Wow.
You know, at that time, before the other, the first inquiry in 81, we had discussed, is it possible to get the land to build the roads to
That's
the back?
your incentive.
No, it was Victor de Vera's.
Oh, really? But
Yeah.
you implemented it, obviously.
Victor de Vera had it, so I always knew in my mind that that was, you know, a potential compromise and a way out for us. So we put in an application for the access road. We knew we could negotiate with one patch of land that we needed from the Wildmore family.
Yes.
So we had talked to them and they were okay for that, but we hadn't got the St. Bart's land. We tried to negotiate for that during that time and couldn't get it.
Now,
So we had to withdraw that application
oh,
and fight the planning appeal purely on the enforcement notice to the manor. And we did that, and we lost. It was a horrible inspector.
oh, yeah.
We knew that he was going to be trouble from the moment the thing started. And a year later, which was 1990, in March, the decision came through. We gathered the devotees and Prabhupada through, and that's when we had to announce, no, they haven't given us permission.
You were trying all kinds of different appeasements.
Well, the inquiry at that time was due to take place, and just before it happened, we did another deal with them, whereby we postponed the inquiry on the basis that we would look for an alternative site in which to create a new temple, and that the Hartsmere were going to grant us planning consent.
Oh, very good.
So a site was identified at that time, which was called the Dagger Lane site. It was a beautiful 40 acres right next to Aldenham Country Park.
Good location.
Fantastic location, incredible access, and
Is that the London transport site?
it was owned by London Regional Transport, and we did some negotiation with them, and at first they wanted us to pay 400,000 for the site, and we talked to them and said we actually need them to not only give us the site, but to actually, they wanted to sell that site on the basis that they got planning consent for a business park on another piece of
Yeah, I
land.
remember that.
So it was 400,000 plus planning for their thing, so that was valuable to them. Their business park would have netted them millions. So we said that you should give us 5 million to help build the temple. And they said, they were just, we can't do that. They said, well, if you don't give us 5 million, how are we going to build this temple? How are you going to get your business park? So they said, all right, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll give you the land for free.
Wow.
So that was the deal. So there was another inquiry around the same time of the enforcement notice, which looked at the possibility of granting planning consent for the new temple at Dagger Lane and granting the business park for London Regional Transport.
Good option.
And that would have meant, but to do this we would have had to sell the manor and build there. Now,
Tricky.
that was a major issue. The council then also wanted to buy the manor office in order to make sure that it was sold.
Whoa.
As part of the deal.
That's very
They didn't want us
sly.
to keep the manor, and which we could have done. Technically, we could have kept the manor but not use it as for public worship, and just let the public worship down the road.
This is the first time I'm hearing this. This
So-
is very dangerous.
Yeah, so there was all sorts of these shenanigans going on. However, the Secretary of State turned down Dagger Lane. He wouldn't give it. So he had refused Dagger Lane. The road wasn't an option. and he said that the temple should close, but he extended the period of closure to 2 years. Now we then went to through the High Court for appeal, and then through the European Court of Human Rights, and it took 2 years to get rid of all those appeals. So that meant in March the 16th, 92, the beginning of the 2 years started to run.
Remember that.
So we had 2 years until March 94
to resolve everything.
to resolve everything. Now, the only chance that we had to do that was to reinstate the access road thing.
Yes.
So we went through new kind of efforts to try and get that second piece of land with St. Bart's.
Okay. The first piece of land was owned by a local landlord,
The Wildmore family.
and he was fairly
They were very favourable.
favourable.
They were very favourable, and it was to do with the fact that they believed that that we would build a temple on their land, and they would get even more money from us.
Oh, a lot of opposition, I believe, to us building a road because they didn't want us, period, in the area. So Wildmore's landowners were favourable, but people were behind the scenes trying to stop them even.
Yeah, there was pressure on the Wildmore family not to sell to us
By who?
by the villagers, and I also believe by some of the members who were councilors of Hartsmere.
Oh, I see.
They'd also the council sent a delegation to St. Bart's to tell them not to sell the strip to us.
As well, yeah.
Yeah, that was absolutely nasty.
Very nicely.
You know, that's...
We had heard...
But we had one person who was a trustee who was a friend of the temple.
Yes, very good.
So he was telling us what was going on. He was trying to encourage them internally. And they were, St. Bart's were in the news about their finances, and they needed money to do this, that and the other. So we were playing on the fact that how can this wonderful hospital turn down pure cash for, you know, a strip of land in the middle of nowhere that's doing no good when they could need that money for the good of the hospital.
So there were two landowners that you had to convince. Eventually we heard that the...
In November 93 we got the news that St. Bart's were willing to sell. And at that point I remember going to Prabhupada and basically saying,
we've acquired it.
we're on the home straight now. I knew that at that point I knew that we'd be okay.
Right.
That was the turning point.
So the St. Bart's land was joining Bhaktivedanta Manor's land?
So with the strip from St. Bart's and the strip from Wildmore, we were now linked entirely all the way from the manor to Hillfield Lane.
Which is the alternative.
And immediately we had the planning application in within a month.
Wow.
And that then the council decided they would look at it. Now, this was now running over the 16th of March 94, the day that the temple was meant to close.
Wow.
We scheduled our major march for that day. We had a lot of discussions and we kind of concluded, no, it's got to be the actual day. That's the day of significance. We campaigned up and down the country, you know, to gather people coming in coaches from all over. And sure enough, 35,000 people came to, and we had the march from Red Lion Square in central London to the War Museum. We had the Sikh contingent. The devotees were all wearing these orange kind of little chadders or neck, you know, short little scarves. And that kind of set up a kind of militant, you know, uniform type of mentality. And the Pandava Sane was our new youth group, and Special Branch were asking us questions. What do you know about these Pandavas, you know, these young Asian youth? Are they going to be trouble? So we were saying, don't know, could be.
You mentioned about the Pandava Sena, and also the Hare Krishna defense movement was well in stride.
Yeah.
And it was named the defense movement.
Yes, after the enforcement notice was refused in 1990, the mood of our Save the Temple campaign changed, and we formulated the Hare Krishna Temple Defence Movement.
Oh.
So it was meant to be a much stronger, heavier message. We're angry about this. Now, I heard around that time from an insider who was interviewed by Chris Patton, who was at that time the Secretary of State for the Environment. He said, look, if I give this enforcement notice and I uphold it, and close the temple, will the Hindus riot? And he was told, no, they won't. Hindus don't riot. So we thought, fine, go ahead, close the temple. That was the thinking that went on at that time.
That's their strategy.
They weren't worried about the Hindus. It would have been the Muslims.
Oh,
They would have had a different view.
But nevertheless, they were keeping an eye on us.
They were keeping an eye on us, and we know that there was issues of phone tapping.
Yes.
We were informed by that by the people in the BT.
British Telecom.
Yeah, and in my house, when we had a problem with the phone, I called BT and he said, oh, there's something interesting happening here. Do you think your phones could be tapped and intercepted? So,
and what to speak of the manor telephones and fax lines, because there was no internet, wasn't so rampant. So yes, they were intelligence gathering.
There was a lot of incidents where the police were watching, and there was some heavy behaviour at one demonstration at Hartsmere. The police were there with police dogs.
Yes, I remember that.
And that was a heavy...
nasty.
Yeah.
They could have unleashed them.
So we had the main march in 16th of March 94. And actually the community loved it so much, they enjoyed showing their strength and their unity. They were really proud of themselves. It was incredible.
Yeah.
So 3 months later we arranged a follow-up event which was touted as a lobby your MP. So we got 8,000 people again from different parts of the country. So we're not as big a group, but highly briefed. They were being brought down in coaches, and in the coaches they would talk to them in Gujarati and say, here's what's going to happen. And at 3 o'clock, Big Ben goes bong, bong, bong. I remember Frank and Naresh were the first ones out there. They just stepped across the road, and the whole community, walked onto the road and sat down.
Sit down strike.
That was the sit down.
They didn't expect that.
No. Because at that point we were all very kind of casually lined up, waiting to go inside to meet our MP.
They thought that we were pushovers.
Yeah.
That's what they thought. Call for the devotees to come and show their dedication, and the Hindu community were right behind us. And you also engaged me in the international front at the end of '95. I remember that I got unbelievable inspiration, and once you gave me the go-ahead for the Mandela episode, which is kind of a separate issue on its own because it received so much media attention. And but from our friend, Councillor Frank Ward, who had been introduced to you by a member of Parliament way back, he turned out to be a real soldier.
Yeah.
Even he told me privately he was a Royal Marine in the Korean War.
He was quite a fighter.
Scotsman.
He was from Glasgow, and just a street fighter. So what happened was he was a Labour councillor in Hartsmere. He would always go to the Labour Party conference, and then one time he met an MP. I think it was the Leicester MP. They were chatting, and Frank revealed that he was from Hartsmere, and the MP said, "Oh, Hartsmere, I understand there's a problem with the Hindu temple down there. I've heard from one of my constituents." Because a lot of we were encouraging people to go to their MPs and discuss it with them. So Frank didn't know about it, so he thought, well, I better look into it. So he went back and talked to a couple of people and said, yeah, we passed this motion to issue the enforcement notice. And Frank was shocked that actually his Labour group had agreed to it
Oh dear.
at that time.
Oh dear.
And I can't remember what he had done about it, whether he had clocked what was going on, but the Labour group, I think as a group, voted for it, so he may have had to go along with that. However, he came to the temple the end of 1987. You know, we'd been going for a year, we just got the enforcement, we're just about to get the enforcement, well, we had the enforcement notice. So, he then took up the fight, and he just made it his life's mission that he was going to save the temple.
I remember. Yeah.
So he was with us all the way through then
To the end.
next 8-9 years.
Yeah. Yeah, it was amazing how Krishna sent him, because I don't believe any politician would have gone and done the things that he did.
That's right. I mean, we could probably list a number of the very specific instances, and of course you got to travel with them and do those international events, which
Yes.
was brilliant. They did help. I think the most important element was that Frank worked with his close friend Brian Stanley. Brian Stanley was the leader of the Labour Party group
Yes.
in Hartsmere, and Brian Stanley made it official party policy that they would support the temple
Through thick and thin.
through thick and thin, with or without the road actually, but
Oh.
with the road particularly.
Okay.
They were willing
So
to
he
support.
deserves credit. Brian Stanley.
Brian Stanley deserves incredible credit. He passed away, I think, just a few years ago. But I met his son at Kathy's funeral
Okay.
and thanked him.
Frank's
for,
wife.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and thanked his son for all the help that his father had given. And his son was really, he knew about it, and he said, we were brought up with all of this, and we were pleased that our father could do his bit. So, the way, yeah.
So Frank had Brian Stanley, but Frank also divulged to us, especially when we went international, that there was a racial undertone, and that inside the chambers.
Not just Frank, but actually I had some of the Tory MPs, Tory
Leaders.
councillors
Yeah.
coming to me saying, I can't associate with what the rest of my group are doing.
Oh.
Yeah, no, we had Tory councillors who said, I'm not going to vote with them,
Oh, really?
because as far as I'm concerned, they're just racially motivated.
So it was quite heavy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was, and it was known, and it was very hard for us to say it because they were very, very cautious in doing anything up front, but everyone knew what the situation was. Cecil Parkinson told me, and he's passed away also, he was the MP for us in Maggie Thatcher's government, and he told me initially, this is all just electioneering, meaning that the Tory group in Hartsmere were just out to try and gain some points for themselves. And then he said, but quote me on that and I'll deny it. But he's not here to deny it anymore.
So the planning application went in, and you were on the Royal Road. However,
We had to go through the public inquiry on this one. Now this time we felt really strong. We had the strips secured for the application. During the public inquiry, an issue came up. Okay, you can get people into the manor property, the 17 acres that we've always had,
yes,
but you don't have much parking.
parking.
You only have what was called the car field,
Yes,
which is about 4 acres or something.
yes. Can't get that many cars in there.
No, and we never actually were able to use that for Jan Mashna. It wasn't enough. We always needed to break into the field next door.
Yeah.
And sometimes then sort that out afterwards.
Yes.
So it was very clear that the council thought that was their ace.
Oh, they were going to get us.
They were going to get us on that. So in the middle of the public inquiry, I set up a meeting one afternoon. I think we were having a short session. I went to see Wildmores and said, we're buying the whole land off you.
Wow.
So we did the deal. We were able to come back pretty well within a day. And I remember the barrister wanting to do it like this.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Das, I have this document in front of me. Could you tell me what this document is? Well, it's a conveyance for land. Oh, and which land would that be? Now, this is 40 extra acres of Wildmoors land. And would that be sufficient for all of the Janmashtami parking? And actually, we had a really good, lovely guy called Hanchett, who was the inspector. We knew he was on our side, and particularly loved Shruti Dharm, who was helping to run things. So I remember him being really kind of, very good, because that meant that he could tick that off.
Yes.
If there is an objection about parking,
It's done.
it's done.
Now, we heard that the Wildmoor, although he was petitioned not to sell, but he did, he had a dream, and I'm not sure when he had the dream, but was the dream linked to the extra land? Because we heard from you, we heard it in the temple.
Apparently, he says that he had a dream that Krishna wanted him to sell the land to us. So
Couldn't be better.
couldn't be better.
And he agreed.
Yeah.
He agreed.
So we then went through the public inquiry. We had to wait a full year. Things were trundling on. The temple hadn't closed on the 16th of March 94 because the council had been willing to wait until they resolved it, which wasn't until the summer of 94 where they refused. And then technically it was very odd, the situation where we closed, where we not.
Yeah.
We actually never technically closed the manor for one single day.
So things started to really turn sweet now.
Yeah. Now, the public inquiry had happened through June 95. In August 95, there was a Janmashtami festival. Technically, we were supposed to be closed. We weren't supposed to have any festival. As I understand it, we didn't organise anything, but we let people come in for Darshan.
Quietly.
But we were prosecuted for that, and therefore it was a criminal charge in being in breach of enforcement notice.
Yes.
So they charged the temple and they charged me personally. So I have the distinction of having a criminal record.
Really?
Not just a civil one, but an actual criminal record for having organised a religious festival. But they did that so that we couldn't pass the buck back. If they charged us the temple, then the temple could say, "Oh, it was that guy,
Yeah.
Mr. Akandhadhi."
How much was the fine?
I had no fine, but the temple had 20,000,
That's a lot of money.
which is the maximum. The guy gave the maximum.
Rascal.
So we appealed that. Then, what happened was, there was a change in the country. Tony Blair's kind of new image of Labour was gaining force. And in the May local elections, there was a complete sweep across to Labour.
In Hartsmere.
And Hartsmere turned colour for the first time ever, and only time. And that's when the Labour group were now in charge. So we had a meeting the next day with the Labour group. Brian Stanley called us into the office. We want to discuss the manor.
Yeah.
We want to sort this out.
Sort it out.
We were still waiting for the decision to come through on the planning inquiry. But what happened was Naresh Chadha, the head of the HKTDM, put a press release out that the temple is meeting with the Labour group and hopefully will resolve the temple dispute. And that went on the news, the television news, at lunchtime.
Now, did that agitate the Conservatives, or did they do
Well,
something?
what happened was, that afternoon, while we were in the office meeting with the Labour group, I got a call from the manor to say a fax is coming through from the Secretary of State,
Wow.
from the Tory gang. And it was the decision.
Victory.
The victory decision. One of our contacts was actually called into John Gummer's office and shown two reports. One approving the road and the temple, and the other to close it. And
Not
to
straightforward.
refuse. So they'd written up two reports after all the kind of debates, one of them weighing it in favour of us and one weighing against. And he was asking people, which should I issue?
Oh my dear.
But the Labour Party's kind of support of us, and the Tories were worried that they might lose. They were already losing so much support. They didn't want to lose the Hindu support as well.
So it was a political
It
decision.
was a political decision.
Yes.
However, it was a political decision that worked only because One, we had provided an alternative, a real solution on the access road, and we'd done our homework on it. Two, we'd actually given enough planning things that them issuing a planning notice in our favour couldn't be challenged. It was well supported. And three, we had all that social pressure that had been building up through those campaigns and the marches and things. So everything came together at that one moment. The approval was there, and now the next thing was we had to build the road within 3 months for Janmashtami.
Oh dear.
Impossible.
Yes.
But we found an engineer who did some soil samples and said, you know what, you've got this exact composition of sand and clay here that we can use a system that the Romans used to use called lime stabilization. We just run this machine up and down here and churn some lime into it. We wanted to do it for Janmashtami. We had to put in new traffic lights on the A41. That should have taken months, if not years. But again, it just happened that there was a devotee person in the Highways Authority who said, well, we're already doing work on another part of the A41, I'll just include this. So that was done first.
Very good.
Unbelievably. And the day before Janmashtami, the council came and said, oh, you haven't put the gravel on top of the road, so it's not 100% finished. We said, come back this evening. And we had gravel on this, so they said, okay, you've got your festival.
In the facts that came from the authority, the central government authority, did it give us full facilities?
It gave us full facilities. It gave us everything we asked for, public worship and for festivals and the rest of the
That cannot be reversed.
No, this is permanent. And actually, there's lots of very powerful statements in there. So with the access road in for Janmashtami, then we went and got the final piece of land from St. Bart's. That gave us 82 acres. We had planning consent, we had the new road. It is worth mentioning that prior to the public inquiry, after the public inquiry, before a decision was given, council came to us and offered us a deal. They said, we'll give you the public worship on Sundays, no festivals, and you don't get the access road. And we had to think, well, that's something. We can live. We could operate with that. It may not be in the way we want, but at least that safeguards the manor.
But not the best deal.
But it's not the But if we go to the public inquiry, we could end up with nothing.
Or gamble.
So this is a gamble. This was a huge, huge gamble.
But Krishna was involved.
And we discussed it, and at one point, the meeting, it was very clear. It was like Krishna kind of descended and said, no, we can't do this. We have to go for the access road. That is our future. And that proved to be, once the road was in, the village was happy, the council are happy. I mean, it just changed like that.
Yes.
And then what happens, 15 years later or so, we put in an application for the Haveli, and it gets approved unanimously by the Tory-controlled council.
They can't bully us anymore.
They can't put it in, nor are they interested in it. They love us. We're now part of the establishment. The Prime Minister comes to us to lay the foundation stone for the Haveli.
Yes.
It's just crazy.
So after
the turnaround in circumstances.
After all said and done during the struggle to get permission, how much did it all cost? I mean, there's no real figure because the people's input, your input, everybody's input was massive.
We must have spent at least 2 million.
That's just the money.
Yes, probably about roughly half of that would have been on the legal and professional fees for all that stuff.
Plus the